Good afternoon. My name is Miłosz and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the organizers of today's debate, which are the Gdansk Institute for Market Economics and the European Commission representation in Poland. Today we will talk about the green transformation of Polish agriculture, what is its meaning, philosophy, and the way to the goal. And this, of course, takes place as a part of a broader action. You can also read the materials available on the kongresobywatelski.pl website, where we also write more about the agricultural transformation. The year-round partners of the Civic Congress quarterly are the Marshal's Office of the Pomeranian Voivodeship, the City of Gdańsk, the Pomeranian Development Fund, Maritex, and Basegra. And the partners of this issue are BNP Paribas Poland, Biogen, Nestle, and Good Valley. Now I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished guests. Janusz Wojciechowski, European Union Commissioner for Agriculture. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Małgorzata Bojańczyk, Director of the Association of Sustainable Agriculture in Poland, ASAP. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And Bartosz Urbaniak, Head of Agri BNP Paribas Banking for Central and Eastern Europe and Africa. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I would like us to start by defining the situation we are in at the moment, with the situation of agriculture both in Poland and more broadly in the European Union, and what impact this has on the food well-being of the rest of the world. I would like to start with a broader global situation on the basis of the European situation, because the European Union is the largest source of agricultural subsidies and also one of the largest producers of agricultural innovations. I would like to ask Commissioner Janusz Wojciechowski to define the current situation in the agricultural policy of the European Union and what are the greatest challenges and what are the greatest or main currents of thought at the moment from the perspective of Brussels. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important and necessary debate. Where are we in the situation? We are finalizing the biggest reform of the Common Agricultural Policy in 30 years. A reform whose assumptions were prepared in a slightly different, or even far different, situation than the one we have today. The European Green Deal and some foundations for the reform of a common agricultural policy, the political idea of the Green Deal, were created when the main challenge, the problem for agriculture, seemed to be climate change and environmental issues. Unfortunately, these challenges related to natural disasters, which have affected agriculture very strongly, have been joined by two factors that fundamentally change the situation or create new forceful challenges. The first was undoubtedly COVID, a pandemic with huge negative effects on the entire economy. The second factor is the Russian aggression against Ukraine and its consequences for food security, not only in the European but also in the global dimension, because even the interruption, blocking for some time, of grain deliveries from Ukraine, a major grain exporter important on world markets, has created and continues to create threats for global food security. And the word food security came back to the fore. It was not perceived as such when the Green Deal was established. It was December 2019, the beginning of 2020, the beginning of the work of the committee of President von der Leyen. In May 2020, two main strategies related to the Green Deal were announced. That is the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. Those that create some challenges for agriculture, but then in June 2021 we adopted the reform. Political agreement was reached on the content of a reform of a common agricultural policy, and then we already had the first picture of how much of this green transformation will actually be funded in European agriculture, mainly in the regulation on the strategic plans of the Common Agricultural Policy. In December 2021, three main regulations regarding the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy were adopted, and now we are at the stage of implementing national strategic plans. For the first time in the agricultural policy of the European Union, this system has been introduced. The Common Agricultural Policy, the shape of which is programmed in three regulations, but mainly in the regulation that concerns national strategic plans, and then a kind of national agricultural policy implementing these European Union-wide goals, but adapted to the challenges the problems of individual countries is precisely in the national strategic plans. Today we are at the stage that, as of today, there are 13 plans adapted. Tomorrow they will be accepted. Poland was in the first group. 7 countries had adopted these strategic plans already in August this year, and Poland was in the first 7. And basically speaking of the green transformation, we should look primarily at the strategic plan, what is in it. And I can say with satisfaction that Poland has a good strategic plan, and even very good in some aspects. And the positive elements of a from farm to fork strategy, or the broadly understood Green Deal, in this plan were introduced in such a way that it will be beneficial for farmers and those fears that were raised so much. Farmers saw this green transformation as a threat. They saw such a tendency to over-restriction. At the moment, I will not say that they have completely stopped, but they do not have such grants as it seemed before. First of all, great support for breeding through support for animal welfare. 1,700 million euros for the next 5 years will be directed to livestock farms, which are to improve animal welfare well above the required standards. That is, focusing on less intensive farming or sustainable animal farming, because increased welfare in such farming is supposed to function. Let me just point out that this 1,700 euros is for a period longer than 5 years. The strategic plans and agricultural policy are planned for 5 years, but as far as the budget is concerned, it is considered over a period of 7 years. This is due to the fact that for 2 years we had a transition period as a new fund bought old rules. But from January the 1st, new rules come into force in this strategic plan, which includes more for animal welfare in Poland than the entire European Union. 27 member states spend in the previous 7-year financial perspective. So that's a huge stream of funds directed at well-being. The other thing is carbon farming. I am very happy. I must admit that I also showed initiative. I was not just waiting for what will be in the Polish plan, but I tried to inspire strongly that this plan should contain such elements, and it does. Many last-minute changes have been made. This is carbon farming, so financially encouraging farmers through the carbon farming scheme to practices such as mixing straw with soil, using natural manure, extensive grazing on permanent grassland, using catch crops, and a whole range of practices that are just good for sustainable agricultural production. I believe that this will actually improve the situation in Polish agriculture. Among other things, it will stop the bad trend of liquidation of animal production. Let me just say that within a decade in Poland, 340,000 farms stopped farming. From 914,000, the number of farms combining crop and livestock production decreased to 574,000. So almost 100, maybe 90 livestock farms disappeared a day. Let's hope that these instruments, this type of intervention will prove effective to stop this process, because sustainable agriculture works best when plant and animal production is well combined. This is a strategic plan. In short, Poland has a good strategic plan that should help to balance agricultural production in Poland. Certain things are outside the strategic plan, and here I will signal one problem. These are pesticides, plant protection products, and ambitious targets related to their reduction. The only problem is that, which is something internally that has also caused some differences within the European Commission, and I have not concealed my dissenting view here. We should very well reduce pesticides, but there is a matter of being fair about differences between member states. There are countries that, one country, I will not mention it here, which has 9 kilograms of active substances per hectare. And there are other countries that have half a kilogram to 6/10 of a kilogram per hectare. Poland is somewhere in the range of about 2 kilograms, also below the European Union average, but not so much below. But the requirement is that everyone should reduce. Those who have many times more cuts by half, and those who use these funds really little also had to reduce by half. This is not a fair approach. In general, we in the European Union have this problem of huge differences. If we take, for example, the energy intensity of agriculture, energy consumption per hectare, the differences are multiple, even 50-fold between countries with the highest consumption and those with the lowest. If we take the nitrogen balance, how much nitrogen is emitted by agriculture, how much is too much of it and emits it into waters or into the air, these are also multiple differences. So this problem of agricultural intensity and lack of sustainability is very diverse if we look at the map of Europe, at the member states. But stopping at this, we are at the stage of finalizing the reform, strategic plans. Poland has a good strategic plans, which gives hope that Polish agriculture, on the one hand, will ensure food security, because it ensures it, just like the entire European agriculture. It is a great success for farmers that in this permanent crisis they have maintained food security, and that in the long run this agricultural production will become more sustainable. Because in order to ensure food security in the long term, even in the medium term, we must undoubtedly balance agricultural production. It cannot be run without restriction. As St. John Paul II once said in a meeting with Italian farmers, work in such a way that you resist the temptations of productivity and profit that are detrimental to respect for nature. When this principle is forgotten and humans become the tyrants rather than the custodians of nature, sooner or later the latter will rebel. Perhaps I will stop here in these introductory reflections. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you very much. I will say 3 words of comment. When I was a child, you could see a lot of cars along the roads in Poland. Now there are practically none. They are only practically in these hangar, so to speak, barracks. Sorry to interrupt. Maybe the situation of cattle is not so bad yet. There are worse tendencies when it comes to pig farming. When it comes to breeding, it is still not that bad in Poland, although it has become regionalized. Indeed, there are entire areas of the country where you will not see cows, but the intensity of cattle breeding in Poland is not as high as in many other countries. Sorry for making such a digression here. No problem. However, I would like to talk to Director Bojańczyk. because I really like the name of your association, ASAP. This is a short for as soon as possible. We are aware that climate change is there. It is happening, and at any moment, I mean, not at any time, because it's a process after all. But what I mean is that food production will become more and more difficult with time, and food production in the way that we know we as humanity in general, and actually we in the West, because food is produced in a slightly different way in the poorer part of the world. But how, from your point of view, can we sensibly combine food security for us here in Poland, or for us more broadly in the European Union, without degrading our natural environment in order to maintain sustainable agricultural production? Thank you very much. I would perhaps start with what it really means to balance this agricultural production, because a lot of concepts and definitions have appeared in the public space. We have sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, carbon agriculture, which the Commissioner also mentioned here. It is really extremely important to structure the public debate on this topic and keep everyone informed about the differences, what a given model brings, what are the benefits, what are the challenges, and what does it really mean if we are talking about the ambitious goals of a European Green Deal. I am talking here about agricultural strategies such as the biodiversity strategy, the From Farm to Fork strategy. In our association, we talk about sustainable agriculture, such as activities that limit the impact of agriculture of the environment and climate, enable the profitability of agricultural production, and above all, self-acceptance, which is also very important here. But you have to look at this process from the position of farmers in the value chain. This is very important when it comes to the issue of agricultural production sustainability, and here I will refer to the latest study we have done, because I think it is worth making this point in this discussion, where we examined over 200 companies from the agri-food sector, such as companies that cooperate with farmers and companies that are beneficiaries of changes regarding the European Green Deal. I'm saying beneficiary here because, in fact, apart from the enormity of challenges, in the end, I really hope, of course, that it will look like this, that it will bring many benefits. Where are we in this whole situation? We are really at the beginning of the road. In our study, we identified that 25% of companies are not really taking action yet. 50% of these companies are taking some action towards sustainability. But there are 25% of companies that have been dealing with sustainability for years, have been using sustainable development in their strategy, and above all, they also have been supporting farmers in their value chain. So, of course, we have financial incentives to help with this whole process in terms of common agricultural policy, but the issue of cooperation between farmers and the companies is very important. Thank you. Thank you. Now it is time for Director Urbaniak. I would like to ask you how it looks from the point of view of big business that you necessarily represent. How are we able to provide funding for agriculture, but also how can we also get funding to secure food for us here? And please tell me how the ongoing war is now affecting the food security situation in the area you are dealing with, and among others, Africa, which was one of the main recipients of Ukrainian grain. Good afternoon, thank you. I do not know if I can answer this question well enough, because it is quite complicated, but For the first point, it should be noted that we produce this food in some way all the time, so it is also financed in some way, so the mechanism works. Probably contrary to what the commissioner and the director said, it is subjected to evolutionary rather than revolutionary changes. So the methods of financing evolve, I would say, very gradually. This is probably also related to the fact that decisions are made in dozens of centers, as in there are several dozens of banks that decide to finance. Probably each of us has a slightly different perspective and takes into account other things, but what would be worth paying attention to, what I would like us to draw your attention to, is that when banks make credit decisions, regardless of whether they constant farmers or big business, they try to look at what will happen in, say, 8 or 10 years. When the repayment period of foreign investment loan is customary, especially if we are talking about investment financing. Contrary to how it seems, this is not such a trivial answer if we return to what Commissioner Wojciechowski was talking about, that 90 farms are disappearing every day. So now, since we started talking, one such farm in Poland has disappeared.
Czyli odkąd zaczęliśmy rozmawiać, to jedno zniknęło właśnie już w Polsce tego typu gospodarstwo.
So when we make a credit decision, one of the first questions is, who will pay us back this debt? Whether it will still be a farmer or already a landowner. Therefore, very often, when calculating this money, we also take into account the effects mentioned by Director Bojańczyk. We try as far as we can, and as far as technology allows us, to include in this calculation of future revenues, let's call it environmental costs, as in we try to consider how many unseen or underestimated costs will be revealed in the meantime in the coming years. Here I will talk about this big business. Big business is usually a bit more sensitive, in particular to the mass consumer. Therefore, the farmer most often delivers their goods for processing. If we look at it from the point of view of general connections, what farmers usually produce is processed. Large processors, including those who are the sponsors of today's meeting, are examining how consumers react to the product. Very often, this new trend is worn by the so-called urban consumer, who begins to pay more and more attention to such green aspects as how something is produced. Then, mainly the sales strategies, because the point is to sell well. This trend appears in activities of a large business which formulates expectations to its suppliers.
W działaniach dużego biznesu, no i ten formułuje potem oczekiwania wobec swoich dostawców.
This mechanism is not perfect, and the role of the regulator, the role of the European Commission, which sets certain trends, is very important. I would summarize this part of the statement as follows. Despite the fact that the Green Deal may be considered an ambitious plan, I think that it's very good that we have it. Not every region of the world or not every economic cluster can enjoy the privilege of having a well-defined goal and, as it seems, a well-defined plan on how to achieve this goal. Of course, this will certainly not take place without clashes and some kind of difficulties or compromises between all elements or all participants of the system. On the other hand, I would say that compared to what is happening on the African continent or in both Americas, we have a kind of leadership privilege, which undoubtedly exists and is not questioned by large or smaller participants of this turnover, which is not necessarily so obvious in the United States. Thank you very much. I'd like to touch on this subject, namely the distinction between farmers and owners of large agricultural enterprises, because our agricultural landscape has clearly changed over the last 30 years. We lost a lot of small farmers and a lot of fieldmen appeared, to use archaic language. On the other hand, I would like to ask the director, Bojańczyk, to tell me what it looks like from your perspective, whether the small or the big deal better with sustainable agricultural production, or whether they deal with it in different ways and have different benefits thanks to it. Before answering that question, I'd also like to add a word about what we said earlier, that in this whole discussion we also need to remember about risk management and strategy issues. I'd like this to be included somewhere in this discussion on the implementation of the European Green Deal, on possible changes to the common agricultural policy, because this is what concerns both the big and the small ones. Coming back to your question, in fact, both can benefit from the fact that in Poland we have a structural duality. On the one hand, we have these large, highly commercial farms. On the other hand, these small, traditional farms. And for these smaller farms, sustainable agriculture may be an opportunity to specialize. For example, in the strategic plan organic farming with the amount of 905 million euros in terms of the overall budget to be used, this also has an impact on the objectives of the European Green Deal. However, when it comes to large farms, the scalability is very important here. So, in practice, this translates into greater environmental and climate benefits, but sustainable agriculture can apply to both small and large. This is the compromise between ecology and what we probably have to move away from, as in the environmental cost. We can no longer focus only on these profits here and now, and I have the impression that we are still at the beginning of the road and in such a strategy of waiting it out. We are focusing on what to do in relation to this geopolitical situation, and sustainable agriculture is really, in the long term, about profits and is about taking care of the entire chain from farmers through business to consumers who are also aware of these environmental changes and, of course, the support of regulators. Could I make a comment on this point? Such a question is asked very often, and it is a stereotype, and I would even say a myth, that for agriculture to be efficient, it must be carried out on a large scale, that this must be large area farms, that this must be large intensive farms, and there then are large production effects. However, when you look at the results, these statistics show very clearly the average area of a farm in the European Union is 16 hectares. In Poland, it is 11 hectares. But there are countries where, for example, the highest average is in the Czech Republic, as in the 130 hectares. Then there is Slovakia, with about 100 hectares. Even before Brexit, there was the United Kingdom with 90 hectares. All these countries are food export destinations from Poland. It is not the Czech Republic that exports food to Poland, but Poland to the Czech Republic. Interestingly, Italy has the most efficient agriculture, and this is what Director Bojańczyk talked about in an interesting way. above the position of farmers in the value chain, and above the seldom noticed important indicator, which is the added value in agricultural production. Imagine that Italy, with 11 hectares of farms, just like Poland, has an added agricultural output higher than France, or at that level. In 1 year, France is a bit higher, but Italy in general, 31 billion euros of added production in agriculture. So having 12.5 million hectares, which is the area of agricultural land in Italy, they have added agricultural production at the level of France, which is almost 28 million hectares, and very strong agriculture of which we are aware. This shows that small farming can be very efficient. And what is the key to success? This is precisely the synergy between the three elements of this food system: farmers, food processing, and distribution. What's the problem in Poland? Small farms, much smaller than the European Union average, and concentrated processing. The average Polish farm is 5 or 1/3 of hectares lower than the European Union average. While we look at the processing statistics, the average processing plant in Poland is twice as large as the European Union average. Large processors are not interested in small suppliers. They are looking for large ones. This is a self-propelling mechanism that eliminates these small farms. Now, the National Recovery Plan is extremely important, and let's hope that these obstacles will disappear and it will start functioning, as rebuilding the local processing is very crucial. In order to improve the position of farmers in the value chain, local processing must be rebuilt. As it is in Italy, where this position of the farmer is very strong. The problem is that, objectively speaking, Italian farmers sell wine, not grapes. This is the main element. We are organized in terms of production, collectives, cooperatives. This is extremely important. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting with too long of a comment. No problem. And there was another question. Sorry, I would like to answer it if I can at this moment. I was about to ask you that. We are live, so please go ahead and ask questions. There's a question here, I see it here on the screen. Does the Commissioner consider it beneficial to exclude organic farmers from access to payment under the other eco-schemes on the pretext of avoiding overlapping payments? So I notice opinions appearing here that I do not share. It is not the case that organic farming cannot be combined with eco-schemes. This does not follow any European Union rules. The rule is simple. When the prohibition of double funding applies to the prohibition of paying twice for the same practices on the same land. Nothing less, just that. So nothing stands in the way of paying for different practices, for different eco-schemes, especially for different practices within one eco-scheme, which is carbon farming, but also nothing stands in the way of organic farming to use eco-schemes to the extent that these eco-schemes are not part of organic farming. What we pay for organic farming cannot overlap with eco-schemes, but if eco-schemes cover something that is not mandatory in organic farming, then why not? There are no such obstacles. European Union law does not provide such barriers. Thank you very much. Now I would like to return to Director Urbaniak, because I would like to deal with the thesis that organic farming must necessarily be more expensive. Is it true? I would like you to answer. We, ordinary consumers, look at it from the perspective that ordinary eggs cost, for example, 8 PLN, and eggs on the shelf with the bio inscription cost 14 PLN. And from the consumer's point of view, I have the impression that organic farming is twice as expensive in this case. I would like to ask you for your opinion on this, while taking into account the fact that when we buy food not only for ourselves, but also in a way with our wallet, we influence how our natural environment will look like in the future. The editor answered the question he asked a little, so maybe I will focus on another part. Of course, we are shaping the future through our choices today. There is something that seems to be eluding us very much in recent years, some perspectives for consideration. That is unnecessary. However, we must look at the fact that our decisions will affect the lives of our children and grandchildren. I will answer this in a somewhat elaborate way, but I hope I will not overthink it. If we stick to this example of an egg, we will indeed pay more for an organic egg than for what is now called a regular egg. But we do not buy the same product. It is important to remember that these are often two different things. Therefore, I do not want to compare these hackneyed apples to pears anymore, but they are two different things. The same can be said if we buy clothes or cars. The same pair of pants of trousers, supposedly the same pair, can be several times more expensive, or the same car. Therefore, it is important to remember that in organic farming, you pay for a certain quality. This quality, the method of production, also affects what the final price is. The example of Italy, which the Commissioner referred to, I think also shows that the Italians are European, if not world, champions in adding quality, in adding value to the products. In Poland, you can say half jokingly, half seriously that probably only Highlanders have come close to the fact that the price of milk in Ostepek is probably comparable to the Italian one, or maybe even higher, and other products in Poland cannot reach such a price. So of course, on the one hand, we have something that prevails in the ecological product. We buy great, sometimes really excellent quality. There is an aspect that is very often present in agriculture or economies such as the French and Italian, when you also buy a certain dose of marketing. Listed here are Italian wines. One wonders if there are not equally good wines elsewhere in Europe, and you can pay a little less money for them. I don't want to be accused of negative publicity here. There is also this element of a partially ideological choice, where in these mature consumer societies of the West, it manifests itself more consciously when the consumer sometimes decides to spend more money to support a specific, as it is in regulations, eco scheme. It can be said then that a conscious consumer says, alright, I'm conscious enough and rich enough, because we must also be a rich society, but I'm ready to pay more for a specific product, because it is prepared in a specific way to give a chance for favorable changes, for example, environmental changes. Could I also add a short comment here? Maybe I will be lighting a fuse here, but I believe that is why we are discussing. We are talking about quality, we are talking about price, we are talking about satisfying our conscience as consumers when buying. This definitely emerges in research, and I think that we are already aware enough that we want products produced with respect for the environment and the climate. However, let's face it, there is a compromise in all this. If we focus on production and the sustainable agriculture model, these products will not have to be more expensive. Sustainable agriculture also focuses on quality. We have a farm sustainability assessment or global GAP certification. These are, of course, private certificates, but it has been used in business for years, and in fact, some companies use it much earlier before the European Green Deal entered into force. But what I want to say here, sustainable agriculture, it also focuses on shortening supply chains, on cooperation with Polish farmers, and this can actually help ensure that these products, which will have both quality, it will affect the reduction of environmental footprint, will be covering society in the context of a social goal. We are talking about sustainable agriculture. If they are available on store shelves, we are also supporting it in the spirit. Here, such an important element is the Sustainable Food System Initiative, which I know that in 2023, and perhaps the Commissioner will be able to say more about it, the legal framework is to be presented and how everything will look like. Maybe it will be possible to ask for a word of comment and maybe take a sneak peek at how it is going to look like, because I think we also need this to know what to prepare for. Thank you. May we ask, Commissioner? Thank you very much. I was called and it makes me glad. The From Farm to Fork strategy, in my opinion, its greatest value is that it provides for actions that will shorten the From Farm to Fork path. This road at the moment is probably 188 kilometers in the European Union. A statistical portion of food travels such a distance before it reaches the table. It is easy to calculate. With data from Eurostat, more than 3 billion tons of agricultural and food products are transported across Europe, and is about 540 billion tons per kilometer. So the distance is so long. For example, we can see some types of agricultural production now in this industrial pig farming. Looks a bit like that. Piglets are imported for fattening from across the Baltic Sea, from Denmark. Fodder is from America. Workers are also from various countries, and the market is sought far away in Asia. Sustainability of agriculture should consist in ensuring that suppliers are close, somewhere behind the fence we have huge markets, especially Poland. Poland is not in such a situation as, for example, the extreme case of New Zealand, which produces 15 liters of milk per capita a day and has to export it thousands of kilometers to cope with it. Or Klaus' example of Ireland in Europe, which produces 5 liters of milk a day and huge quantities. I don't remember statistic anymore, huge quantities of meat, and is doomed to export. On the other hand, Poland, apart from apples, which produces in a significant surplus, and even poultry, a large part of which is not agriculturally produced but industrially, has a very close market in other sectors. With the demand for ecological products, I am also glad that Director Urbaniak says it optimistically, because I see it optimistically too. I hear such an argument, no, give it a rest with ecological production, will be no demand for it. And indeed, Poland is far behind the European level. While in Denmark, as far as I remember, an average Dane spends 300 euros a year on organic food. In Poland, it is a few euros. Until recently, it was 4. Maybe now it is a bit more. To some extent, this can be explained by the difference in the level of wealth of societies, but not to this extent. I think that is the issue. If there will be supply, prices will go down. But you have to organize the whole system. There are huge reserves here, like in that merchant anecdote. In my opinion, is an example in which millions people go barefoot here, and all of shoes will be sold here, and that everyone goes barefoot and no shoes will be sold here. There's space for organic farming, for sustainable agricultural products, and even in COVID, it was evident that the demand for organic food was growing. It grew at a higher rate than conventional. I will not reveal too many secrets when it comes to the next prepared projects. I can confirm, though, it will be in 2023. There are also big disputes about how it should look like, for example, qualifying products as sustainable. There are still many things to explain, so I will not go into details. On the other hand, what will be clear is the regulation regarding the certification of carbon farming in the coming weeks. This is a very important document. We will show what practices will be considered as carbon sinks within this carbon farming, and farmers will be able to use it commercially in the future as climate-friendly agriculture. Favorable agricultural practices will be very important for agriculture, and this is the next document that will appear from the Commission. Very good, because I know that farmers are also waiting for it. Yes. I said Director Urbaniak wanted to come forward, so please. It's very rare for bankers to play the role of optimists, and I would like to enjoy such a positive role. I want to support the vision that the Commissioner has expressed. It seems to me that agriculture and the demand for organic farming products are not so bad, but we don't fully see this potential because it is not certified. I can say that at our bank, because I participate in it myself, and I hope that it's not entirely illegal, there are groups, for example, that buy eggs from a certain lady who brings them, and we all believe that they are very ecological, and in my opinion, this is a long-standing tradition in Poland, where there used to be women with veal and then various other things, and we bought them not so much striving for them to have a quality certificate, but because we were looking for some exceptional quality, which most often came from the fact that this food was carefully cared for and made in this way. This is where I justified myself, thanks to Minister Adamowski. I probably did not commit any crime because it is escaped directly from the farm, which is already possible. I would like to point out one more thing, because in my opinion, we are coming to a very important topic in this discussion, which has already appeared in the statements of Director Bojańczyk and Commissioner Wojciechowski. That's indeed how we started this conversation. It is a great change in terms of a plan and idea for European agriculture, the biggest one in 30 years. On the other hand, what is most revolutionary and has just been said is that thanks to, I don't know what to call it yet because the nomenclature is not fully developed yet, but thanks to coal or regenerative agriculture, farmers will be a provider of a completely new service, because it is no longer about farmers not only producing food, but also cleaning the climate or absorbing carbon dioxide. This is something completely different than before. It is not a replacement, but an addition of a certain role, also a social role for the farmer in Europe. Knowing or recognizing the topic of how to deal with carbon dioxide and its absorption from the atmosphere, an increasing number of scientists come to the conclusion
No coraz częściej,
that
coraz większa grupa
this
naukowców
cannot be
dochodzi do
done
wniosku, że
without
tego nie można
active
zrobić bez
agriculture,
rolnictwa i bez
which
aktywnego
means that
rolnictwa,
the
co
role of
oznacza,
farmers
że
in the
rola
modern
rolników w
society
nowoczesnym
of the
społeczeństwie
21st
XXI wieku
century
zaczyna
begins to
wysuwać się
become a
no,
quite
na
important
dosyć
social role,
istotną
without
społecznie
which it may turn
rolę, bez
out
której może
that
się
these modern
okazać, że te
societies are
nowoczesne
unable to survive
społeczeństwa nie
not
są w
only
stanie
in terms of
przetrwać nie
food,
tylko pod
but also in
względem
terms of,
wyżywienia,
let's
ale
call it
również pod
generally,
względem, nazwijmy
caring
to
for
ogólnie,
the
dbania o klimat.
climate. Then I would like to discuss the role of regenerative agriculture or farming more, and I would like to ask Director Bojańczyk whether farmers in Poland are ready to save the world once again.
No,
That
bardzo
is a
szerokie
very broad
pytanie.
question.
Myślę, że
I
są
think they are
gotowi.
ready.
Tylko
They just need a
potrzebują
little bit
jeszcze
more,
trochę
not so
tak nie
much
tyle zachęt,
encouragement,
co myślę, że
but
tutaj
I will refer
odniosę
to
się do
this
tej
issue of
kwestii edukacji,
education.
chociaż wiem, że to jest
Although I know
wszędzie
that it's
powtarzany
repeated
wątek, że
everywhere
potrzebujemy
that we
tej
need this
edukacji.
education.
Ale myślę, że
First of
przede
all,
wszystkim
I
chciałam
wanted to
zwrócić
point
uwagę na
out one
jedną
thing.
rzecz.
Changes are very
Zmiany
intense.
mają
Business
bardzo
keeps up,
intensywne
but I
tempo.
have the
Biznes
impression
nadąża,
that
natomiast mam
when
wrażenie,
it
że
comes to the
jeśli
first
chodzi
stage,
o
as in production in the
ten
field,
pierwszy
it
etap,
will be worth
czyli
sorting out
produkcji na
some
polu,
issues.
warto by było tam tak naprawdę poukładać niektóre kwestie.
Of
Biznes
course,
też oczywiście
business
wspiera
also
swoich
supports
dostawców
its
i
suppliers,
dzięki
and
takim
thanks to
organizowanym
trainings,
przez firmy szkoleniom,
workshops,
warsztatom,
and
nie wiem,
demonstration
gospodarstwa
farms organized by
demonstracyjne,
the
rolnicy
companies,
mogą się rozwijać samo,
farmers can
ale
develop alongside the
nie wiem,
company.
czy na przykład edukacja publiczna
But
jest
I
już tak
do not know if
naprawdę
public education is already at
takim
that
etapie,
stage to
żeby
provide education
zapewnić
that
takie
will allow
wykształcenie,
farmers to
które
save the world.
pozwoli rolnikom uratować świat. Tutaj
Maybe
może
not
nie
that
to,
I
że mam
have
wątpliwości, bo
doubts,
to na pewno wszystko się
because certainly everything
dostosuje,
will
natomiast
adjust,
wydaje mi się,
but
że
it seems to
trzeba
me
by było
that
tutaj
it would
trochę
have to be
przyspieszyć.
sped up a
My też
bit.
jako stowarzyszenie zwracamy na
As
to
the
bardzo uwagę,
association,
nawet
we also pay
pokusiliśmy się
attention to
o
this. We even asked the Ministry
zwróciliśmy
of
się do
Agriculture
Ministerstwa
and
Rolnictwa i
Rural
Rozwoju
Development
mających na celu
to take
wzmocnienie
some action
podstawy
aimed at,
programowej
among
branżowych
other
szkół
things, change the
rolniczych z
core
zakresu
curriculum of industry
dotyczącego
agricultural
prowadzenia
schools in the
gospodarstwa
field of running a
w systemie
farm with a
rolnictwa
sustainable
zrównoważonego,
agriculture
właśnie
system,
podobnie jak
just as it
to
was done
zostało
about
zrobione,
organic
jeśli chodzi
farming.
o
And I was very
misje
pleased with the
ekologiczne
positive
i
response
bardzo mnie ucieszył pozytywny
because
odsłuch.
we are
Są
working on materials that
współpracujący
could
z
help with this
materiałami, które by
process.
mogły
And I
pomóc w tym
think
procesie.
this knowledge support
I
will be
myślę, że
very
tutaj
important.
takie wspólne wsparcie też od strony tej wiedzy będzie bardzo istotne.
Thank you.
Dziękuję.
Thank you very much.
I
I'd like to refer to this very important question, whether farmers are ready for these ambitious challenges, for these changes. I have no doubt that they are ready. However, probably the key question that farmers ask themselves are those who are wondering whether to continue to be farmers or whether to take over the farm from the parents or start farming. This is the choice of young people. The lack of generational exchange is a gigantic problem of agriculture throughout Europe. In Poland, it is even relatively smaller than elsewhere. In my previous function at the Court of Auditors, I was preparing a report on supporting young farmers and generational exchange in the European Union. Poland so happens to be among the three countries, next to Austria and Germany, where the number of young farmers under the age of 35 was in double digits. Everywhere else it was just a few percent, and in Poland about 11. And on the other hand, where the number of farmers of the age of 65 was in single digits, because everywhere else, as in Portugal, over 50%. So the lack of generational exchange is a dramatic problem, but it depends not only on what we propose in the agricultural policy itself, because farmers are able to take up these challenges. I think that living conditions in the countryside and the problem of communication exclusion are becoming a huge problem. To be a farmer, you have to live in the countryside. I remember in my home village the fire band playing when the first bus arrived, and somehow there was no celebration when the last one left. Today, there is not much to get from the village to the commune, from the commune to the powiat, from the powiat to the voivodeship. Actually, some public transport starts at the voivodeship level. Nobody denies that you have to pay extra for the subway, for example, in Warsaw. Public transport is financed a lot from public funds, and there can be no public transport in the countryside because it is not profitable. It's just not that this transport doesn't make money. That's the argument we hear. So as long as we do not improve the living conditions in the countryside, we will not make them more similar to the living conditions in the city, and in many aspects to the access to services. Of course, there will be no theatre in the countryside. You have to get to this theatre. People have cultural aspirations. They want to live like civilized people. I think that for young people who could be farmers, because they are perfectly prepared for this, doubts are raised not so much by the challenges that agriculture poses, but by living conditions. And here we have a huge task. There is a long-term vision for rural development, also in the European Union. We take up these issues, but there's another problem. The common agricultural policy is perceived as huge funds. Yes, it is actually 387 billion euros for 7 years. We spend 58, almost 60 billion on agricultural policy every year. In Poland, it will be 5 billion euros spent annually on agriculture. But compared to the European Union gross domestic product, it is 0.4%. We spend 0.4% on food security, which today is so crucial at the level of defense security or energy security. I do not think it is possible to achieve such ambitious challenges in the long run. That is why, as a commissioner, I set myself such a challenge, because the term of office of a commission will probably last 2 more years, and I will be leaving some preliminary draft of agricultural policy after 2023. It must cost more. It cannot be done with funds that face devaluation, inflation, and so on. There is a problem of scaling the strength up to the aim. The strength must be greater. Thank you very much. I would add a word here in the context of a potential to save the world, because on the one hand, we know that farmers have the best tool when it comes to mitigating climate change, as in capturing and storing carbon in the soil. But all the changes we are talking about here must be, first of all, attractive to, for example, young farmers. And here the Commissioner drew attention to the problem of succession, which in fact had already appeared before, because the young farmer measure was also in the previous perspective, if I remember, the rural development plan as well. So this attractiveness of the way of changing production will not take place without digitization, without modern technologies, and this is what money is needed for. Thank you very much. I see that there are more questions from our viewers. I would like to ask a question from Mr. Václav, who asks if any broader educational campaigns on organic farming or, more broadly, on sustainable agriculture are planned at the level of the European Union. I think that is a question for Commissioner Wojciechowski. Yes, there's already provided for in the reform itself, in programs that are primarily part of the second pillar of agricultural policy. There is support for educational and promotional activities, for example, demonstration farms. There's also in the Polish National Strategic Plan. So there are funds to promote organic farming. As Director Bojańczyk has mentioned, 905 million euros for farms are really large funds, and this is a huge challenge. Poland is one of the countries with one of the lowest levels of development of organic farming. I will share a reflection that may also be important from the point of view of such prospects for organic farming. I travel a lot around Europe and meet farmers. I always try to meet with different groups of farmers. I hear more or less similar complaints throughout the European Union that production costs are rising, energy, fertilizers, plant protection products are either withdrawn or are too expensive. This is a common problem for all farmers. I hear the least complaints, or none at all, from organic farmers and small farmers. I saw farms of several hectares where organic products, some small processing by the way, sometimes it is just some vegetable that you cut, pack, and take to the market. That is enough to get a good income. So it seems that this condition of organic farming raises such hope. If they complain, it is most often about various bureaucratic barriers and not about the fact that there's a problem with market or sales. So there's a reflection. Education, promotion, definitely yes, and there are funds and resources for it. It's guaranteed in the Polish National Strategic Plan. I also saw a question about fertilizers. Could I answer it now? Of course. The problem with fertilizers is that when we planned the Green Deal, we assumed that the consumption of chemical fertilizers in the European Union would decrease by 20% by 2030, so within a decade. And suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where it shrank by 20% or even more in a few months because of the obvious circumstances. Gas prices, Russian aggression, and preparations for this aggression caused this situation on the fertilizer market we were trying to mitigate. In the short term, we must ensure the supply of chemical fertilizers, because without them, food security cannot be maintained. Let's face it. In the long term, we need to look for alternatives, make agriculture more independent of chemical fertilization, and there's really a huge room for improvement here. I will provide the example of Finland. Within a decade, it reduced the use of fertilizers by a quarter and increased the yields by a quarter at the same time. When you look at the amounts of fertilization it yields, you can see that there's really a lot to be done to use these fertilizers more rationally. Also in Poland, if we compare voivodeships with similar soil conditions, I don't want to list any so as not to cause regional antagonisms, but there can be twofold differences in fertilizer consumption per hectare in the absence of any adequate or any difference in the yield. So this is really something to improve, but we do not want to eliminate chemical fertilization in any way. It is a part of farmers and will be, just for example, precision farming is extremely important to use, because with its help we can use less fertilizers and have greater production effects. Also, I would like to mention this alternative related to microbiological preparations or even rating of soil quality in terms of biological quality. So the problem here is the spectrum of different things you can do. However, perhaps in the future it will be worth allocating more funds for this type of treatment in the common agricultural policy, because now the biological production of crops is probably 90 euros per hectare, but for 5,000 hectares this scalability is quite small. Here's another question I see. Mr. Michał asks whether soil liming will be recorded as one of those activities that will allow the farmer to obtain a certificate as part of carbon farming. I believe that is a question for Commissioner Wojciechowski. There are still discussions about what should be on this list. Perhaps I'm giving too much technical detail prematurely. whether only climate-friendly practices should be considered or biodiversity-friendly ones as well.
Praktyki korzystne dla klimatu, czy także te, które są korzystne dla bioróżnorodności.
There are still some things to explain here, so I will not answer this question in detail. There's a whole list of practices and a matter of evaluating which ones are obviously beneficial for the climate, but also which ones do or do not have a positive impact on biodiversity. I could also add here that not every correct technique must be rewarded in some way by one or another decision of the regulator, which is the European Union. I can say that in these banks, in these countries that I supervise, a technique such as soil liming is a positive element when calculating the creditworthiness of farms. So we pay attention to whether these techniques are used, and if they are used, then of course the assessment of such a farmer's activity is perceived much better. I think that I will refer to this question again, and I'm not going to answer anything else in this regard. I'm just going to show my concern, because someone asked if there are broader educational campaigns planned. As I look at the amount of knowledge that needs to be acquired in order to keep up with the pace of what is changing in agriculture now, and here we also talked about the fact that science and technical progress will continue to accelerate to meet the climatic and economic requirements, because even fertilization itself will be displaced by bioactive substances. It is possible that with something we do not know yet, and science has yet to provide. I have the impression that the average farmer must acquire a level of knowledge comparable to the legendary Encyclopedia Britannica, in the meantime taking care of proper cultivation and in a very good way. I wonder whether the various types of agricultural advisory systems and such support systems, which have been ridiculed not so long ago, should not be strongly promoted now so that this knowledge can be provided. If you look at the farmer's point of view, and anyone who runs a business in the city, the farmer must be a man of many parts, and cybernetic parts at that, plus a piece of a scientific institute. So this also seems to me a very worrying phenomenon, that there's not necessarily a good balance, or we expect a lot from farmers in terms of education skills. If I may comment, I thank the director very much for this statement, because it is true that today a farmer must have not only agricultural knowledge, but also zootechnical and veterinary knowledge, must be familiar with technology, IT, must know law, for example, because the legal environment is so complicated that it's needed to know how to deal with it. So indeed today it is a very demanding profession, but I also see that farmers today, when I meet them, are people with really vast knowledge. Farmers in Poland, not only in Poland, but the level of agricultural knowledge is really high, which does not mean that you do not need to provide this knowledge all the time, because indeed, these challenges such as coal farming are all this profound knowledge which not everyone has. We will certainly try to use funds for education, various programs and consultancy. Consultancy is everywhere provided for in the second pillar of the Common Agricultural Policy in order to develop it. Thank you. I would like to return to an issue that has already been raised in several places, namely the fact that there are fewer farmers and that is a career, one can say, which is not commonly sought after. Here, from my point of view, when I was going to school, The work of a farmer was not associated with prestige, nor was it associated with something that required any specialist skills. So as a result of how our country was developing, urbanization progressed, which meant that people moved from countryside to the cities. So those who stayed in the countryside were the worse ones, because they did not go to the city. Times go by, or it has been some time, and we see that this is not a fair approach of the situation. It seems to me that in order to keep young people, so to speak, grandiloquently, working in the countryside, apart from investing in the information itself, we should invest in the social perception of the farmer. The farmer is still associated with someone who drives a tractor in the fields, and that is pretty much it. On the other hand, as we have already said, agriculture currently requires a great deal of specialist knowledge, and I would like to ask the director, what suggestions do you have regarding, first of all, increasing the prestige of a farmer's work, of a perception of a farmer in society, but also what ideas do you have to keep people at this job, because it's a career for life?
My tak naprawdę
We
to
are
robimy
actually
w
doing
całym
it,
stowarzyszenia, chociaż
because the main
takim
goal of the
głównym jest upowszechnianie
association
wiedzy na temat
is to disseminate
zrównoważonego
knowledge
i tej
about
części
sustainable
dotyczącej
agriculture
właśnie
and the part regarding society.
społeczeństwa. Ja tu
I
wspomniałam
have
już o
already
tej
mentioned the
atrakcyjności
attractiveness of a way of
sposobu
changing
zmiany produkcji,
production.
więc
So
to
this
jest
is an issue
kwestia jakby
at the farm level,
na poziomie
as in for
gospodarstwa.
young people, it may
Czyli
be
dla
so
młodych
attractive
ludzi
that
może
they
być to w
will
taki
want to
sposób
stay there.
atrakcyjne, że będą chcieli tam
And this
zostawać.
is
I to się
happening
dzieje, dlatego
because
że
of,
rozmawialiśmy
as we
tutaj
have
właśnie
already
o
talked about it
cyfryzacji,
here,
o jakichś nowych
digitization, new
technologicznych.
technological innovation.
Z drugiej strony
On the other hand, consumers also
duży
have a big
chyba
impact on
wpływ na to
this.
też
As I have
mają
already
właśnie,
mentioned the issue of
nie wiem,
locality.
konsumenci,
We did
którzy
the first report,
oczekują
Sustainable
tych,
Food in
tak jak
Poland,
wspominałam
last
już,
year, and we
kwestii
found out
lokalności.
that
My taki wcześniej
over
zrobiliśmy
70% of
w tamtym roku
consumers,
pierwszy raport
when
Zrównoważona żywność
choosing
w
a
Polsce
product
i
at the
tam nam
shelf,
wyszło, że ponad
looks
70%
at the locality of the
konsumentów przy
product.
półce, jak wybiera produkt, to patrzy na lokalność tego produktu.
There's
Są już
also
też informacje,
information
że
that a
dany
given product
produkt
comes
pochodzi
from such a
od
farmer.
takiego rolnika.
So
Więc jakby
shortening this
skrócenie tej
information, that
informacji
is not
też,
like we choose a
że
product,
to
but
nie jest tak, że
actually choose something
wybieramy
that is
produkt,
backed
tylko
by the hard
wybieramy
work
tak
of
naprawdę
farmers, is also very
coś,
attractive in my
za czym
opinion.
stoi ciężka praca rolników. To jest według mnie też bardzo atrakcyjne. Po
Secondly,
drugie,
when
jeśli
it comes
chodzi
to the business
jeśli
side,
chodzi od
the
strony
most important issues,
biznesu, o te
we
najważniejsze
should be very
kwestie, no to
transparent.
powinniśmy chyba być bardzo
We
transparentni.
should
Tak?
show
Powinniśmy
these
pokazywać te zmiany
changes in numbers, share
na
information on
cyfrach,
how
dzielić się
cooperation with
informacjami,
farmers
jak
looks
wygląda
like,
ta
build
współpraca
partners
z
relations,
rolnikami,
and then
budować
suppliers will see
takie
that
partnerskie
they are in a very
relacje
good
i wtedy
competitive
po prostu
position
też jakby
in all
dostawcy
this
będą
and
widzieć, że
are
są
also
w tym
appreciated.
wszystkim na bardzo dobrej pozycji konkurencyjnej i są też docenieni.
That is how I
Więc
would answer that
tak bym
question.
odpowiedział na to pytanie.
Thank you very much. I have one more open question. If you would like to answer, please come forward. Namely, I am wondering whether at the moment a better trend should be the centralization or the decentralization of both agricultural production and processing in order to make agriculture more sustainable and while maintaining an optimal level of costs, give a maximum level of profits. In an ecological sense, for example. Who would like to answer this question?
No, spróbuję.
I will try.
Oczywiście, że
Of course, when it comes to agricultural production, it should be decentralization and even distribution of agriculture. What is the problem of Poland in many other countries? Indeed, the fact that production specializes in itself is not a bad thing, because economic conditions require
To
it.
samo w sobie nie jest złe, ale no, niejako warunki ekonomiczne to wymuszają.
But if it is concentrated somewhere, for example, dairy farms in one region of Poland, such as Polakia, Northern Mazovia, Warmian Mazurian Voivodeship in Mazuria, or pig farming in Greater Poland and the Łódź Voivodeship mainly, or fruit growing in Southern Mazovia or part of the Łódź Voivodeship, We should strive to ensure that agricultural production is distributed as evenly as possible.
Produkcja rolna była w miarę możliwości równomiernie rozmieszczana.
There are many instruments that can be used to encourage this. For example, perhaps not providing European Union funds for the construction of new large pig farms in the same region where there are already many of them. Perhaps supporting the return of breeding to these pig farms that are empty today because farmers have stopped breeding there. And perhaps encouraging to returning to breeding where it is to be done. Today is not. So definitely decentralization in this sense and local processing, as many agricultural products as possible should be placed as close as possible thanks to the combination of agriculture and local processing. Exports are absolutely necessary. I myself carry out European food promotion missions. I have been to Vietnam, Singapore, I'm going to Japan. This promotion is needed, but above all, it is necessary to rebuild the link between agriculture and local markets as much as possible. Poland does not have too much pork. It is a net importer. It has more or less as much milk as the average European Union production. So there are great opportunities in this shortening of the road from farm to fork. In this sense, centralization or decentralization, definitely decentralization. I would add here the issue of the transformation, that it should be fair. That this is what the Commissioner also mentioned at the beginning of our discussion. For example, the issue of plant protection products. The point is that the objectives should be assigned evenly in all countries, adequately to the conditions. So it is also about looking at the European Union policy very fairly, but also in a global approach. Making appropriate agreements to prevent even greater polarization between the poor and the rich, because I think this is also a very important aspect that the European Green Deal is in the international discourse is sometimes perceived as not entirely fair as well. Taking into account social and economic conditions in different countries and also in relation to Europe and within Europe is very important. To wrap this game up, I will score a goal for decentralization as well and give it a 3-0 win. If I were to develop this economic corner, the theory and practice of economics will be relentless. A lot of small decisions will always be better in the long run than occasional single decisions. The risk mentioned by Director Bojańczyk is also reduced in this way. If we make plenty of small decisions, we may never make the absolutely optimal best decision, but we certainly will not make a lot of bad decisions either. This is what it looks like, and this is why decentralization gets a point from me. Thanks to economically and financially best decisions which are made in a distributed manner. Thank you. I would also like to ask you for a short, maximum 2-3 minute long summarizing statement, because we will be slowly finishing. Namely, what things should we consider now from the point of view of the areas in which you specialize, and what should we focus on the most so that our agriculture will be cost effective for the farmer, and at the same time prices will be optimal for the consumer, but also with us being able to do as much as we can in order to have as little negative impact on our environment as possible, and also to have the least possible threat to our food as a country, and more broadly the whole of the European Union. And I would like to ask the Commissioner first. I think that the challenge when it comes to Polish agriculture, and not even agriculture itself, but the agricultural policy that we should pursue, is to make an asset out of what over the years or over time, and a message not entirely based on knowledge was considered its weakness, that being the potential of small and medium-sized farms and the potential of these disparate decisions that Director Urbaniak talked about. This potential should be used by creating synergies and strength of the entire food sector, combining agriculture with local processing, as much processing as possible in the hands of farmers, cooperatives, producer groups, so that farmers have a greater position in the supply chain and local trade. Facilitating the direct sale of agricultural products is a very good move, and these are the first steps. This needs to be really developed, and agricultural policy should be guided in this direction. There are good grounds in the National Strategic Plan to change agricultural policy in such a way as to strengthen the position of farmers. And the second challenge that I was talking about is one with regard to agriculture itself, and another with regard to rural life itself. It's of great importance that various European Union and national policies remain in synergy, and that the obligation directly enshrined in the treaty is fulfilled. Namely, it concerns the cohesion policy of the great European Union policy, which is very clearly stated in Article 174 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, that the preferences are actually for three areas: rural areas, post-industrial areas, and remote areas. However, when we look at the structure, it is a mistake in European policy that has not yet been eliminated. Prevalence of investing in urban areas is very large. Rural areas are not only not preferred, but very often they are simply discriminated against in the distribution of European Union funds. This can also be seen in Poland. There are poor communes which do not have their own funds for co-financing and take a negligible share or sometimes not at all in the use of cohesion funds. This is a great challenge to restore this fairness and ensure the development not only of agriculture but also of rural areas, according to what is written in the Treaty on the European Union. Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like Director Bojańczyk to answer. Thank you very much. I would perhaps start with the fact that this motivation for the transformation towards sustainable food production is still external. So we have legislation, but also the need to build an image on the part of business. And following this step, I would like to emphasize that it is very important to take care of the entire value chain. Let's look at education when it comes to changes towards sustainable production. Let's look at farmers, because they are the ones who take care of soil regeneration. Let's appreciate that we have them in the value chain, that they also have an impact on reducing emissions. Let's think about processors who shorten the supply chain. Also the role of sellers, who should inform what products they sell, as in the labeling of products, for example, from sustainable agriculture. Responsible financing, taking into account risks and different scenarios. Maybe let's group the standards so that we know where we really are when it comes to production that respects the climate and environment. The issue of consumers, let's give them the opportunity to choose such products. Finally, this dialogue which is necessary in all these elements so as to understand throughout the chain how important this change towards green agriculture is. Thank you. Thank you very much. Finally, I would like Dr. Urbaniak to answer. Looks like we're experiencing some kind of technical difficulties at the moment because there's no connection. Director, can we hear each other? Hello, Director? I suppose there was a question directed to me, but I must have been disconnected at this time. Yes, the same question that has been asked to everyone. In summary, from the point of view of your area of interest, what are the most important things or which aspects should be focused on in order to maintain optimal agricultural production and its prices on the one hand, but also its impact on the climate and the environment? Alright, I am going to slightly hedge my bets here because my excellent previous speakers basically discussed everything that could be paid attention to. So in the meantime, I will go back to playing the banker's role and say that in addition to all of this, you must have money. To achieve this, a lot of money is needed because the most expensive jobs are in agriculture. It has to be remembered, it is not the fault of farmers or agriculture, but simply from the point of view of how much it costs to equip a single job, what is the investment outlay, nothing is more expensive than this sitting in a tractor. Preparing one job in the IT sector and in agriculture, in comparison, this job in agriculture really requires millions of euros. If we want agriculture to meet our ever-reaching, otherwise right, expectations regarding healthier food, not only respecting the climate, but also its repair, then we simply have to pay for it.
Nie tylko odbywało jakieś poszanowanie klimatu, ale wręcz jakaś naprawa klimatu, no to po prostu za to trzeba zapłacić.
There is also no reason or justification, whether social or capital, for the cost of benefits that the entire society will then gain to be borne solely by the farmers themselves. We must be aware that if we want to achieve these goals, we must literally all contribute to the implementation of these goals. I am downright annoyed when someone says that farmers get some grants or subsidies, because most often it is simply a fee for certain activities. We made some terrible semantic and linguistic errors and it needs to be fixed somehow. For example, no one gives such a pejorative subsidy to a sewage treatment plant. Everyone thinks that there you pay for the service, and here it is the same. It remains unknown why we have such a negative association. I would like to conclude by remembering that it will cost money, and it is just business. This is how it's going to look. Thank you very much. I'd also like to add the obvious that we can have something done well, quickly or cheaply, but you can only choose two out of three. Therefore, we should consider whether it would not be worth paying extra for the de facto service, as the director noted, and above all, that we should look at agriculture as something that is quite important, because we eat every day and not fly every day. Thank you for the debate, and the debaters were Janusz Wojciechowski, the European Commissioner for Agriculture. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am also very pleased because it was an inspiring discussion. I would like to thank my co-participants in the discussion, the Director Bojańczyk and Director Urbaniak. Your observations are very interesting. I will keep them in my mind, and I will even use many of the arguments that I had in your statements. I will use them in my future work. Thank you for your inspiration. Małgorzata Bojańczyk, Director of the Polish Association of Sustainable Agriculture ASAP. Thank you very much, and also thank you very much to my interlocutors. I think that such a platform where we can discuss together from different perspectives is incredibly valuable. and also Bartosz Urbaniak, Head of Agri BNP Paribas Banking for Central and Eastern Europe and Africa. Thank you. Thank you very much. And those were 3 opinions, while we have a total of 30 opinions on the transformation of agriculture available in our quarterly at www.kongresobywatelski.pl. Thank you and invite you to next debates.